This is Motivation. I'm Lori Joy Kingwell.
And I'm Chrissy Van. We're two dreamers on two wheels inspired by our community.
And celebrating the voices we're just lucky enough to discover along the ride. So if not already, like, subscribe, follow along, do what you gotta do to not miss an episode.
So today we're talking about switchback of emotions or emotional switchbacks. And just a little heads up, if you're looking for a real bubbly listen, this just is not it today. So save it for another day or wait a little later. But if you're feeling overwhelmed or you're feeling like you don't really know up from down, or big changes have been made that have rocked your world, or the reality that you thought you knew is just changed, or it's different, and there's so many emotions that go along with it. If you've had big breakups or divorces or loss of jobs or closing of businesses, or like myself, deep loss of loved ones, then get cozy. And this episode is for you and for us, really. And as much as my intention is just to share and hopefully let someone out there know that they're not alone, this is also a little bit just for myself and for me and Chrissy, because both of us are very much in it for different reasons, but very, very much in it. And I know I've spoke on previous episodes about going through a lot over the past couple of years, a lot of really deep losses, a lot of really tough moments with family and deaths. And so today I'm just going to actually talk more specific to what's kind of been going on, because it's time to talk about it. And someone that's been so very much a part of my life, my entire life, but deeply over the past couple of years, is my Auntie Val. And she's a very private person. And so now I'm able to speak more openly about her because she's no longer with us. And I know she'd be okay with this, but I got to go back a little bit. And why I got to go back is because it all kind of started with her. And as of today, it kind of ends and somewhat continues because of her, but in really difficult ways, but in really beautiful ways too. See, my auntie was always a really, really big part of my life, my entire life. She is not just my auntie, but she's my godmother, and she didn't have children by choice. And her and I's bond was always very substantial. And I was kind of like a daughter to her. I wore her veil at my wedding. We talked all the time when I was in the Cayman Islands. And when we had that overwhelming feeling that a change needed to happen when we lived there, we were moving, and we knew we were moving to Vancouver, she was pretty ecstatic. She was very ecstatic that we were moving there. So we were closer to her, and it was first time even having family that lived in the same city. And at the time when we moved there, her partner, her husband, had been diagnosed with cancer, and he was a few years into that diagnosis and was getting quite ill by the time that we arrived in Vancouver. And so my auntie's a big introvert, and she didn't have much of a life outside of caretaking for my uncle. And so when we moved here, a big part of living here was to bring a little light back into her life and a little relief. And so we had our dates, and I also looked to help her out with my uncle, who I was also very close with. He was a motorcyclist his whole life. He's one of the reasons I got into it. And him and I had a beautiful bond. And so for the first year and a half of living in Vancouver, that was a big part of our lives, was being with my auntie, helping her through everything, and then also spending that time with my uncle and helping get him to his appointments. And we were even there the last 10 days of his life, right by his side, in the hospital until his last breath. And after my uncle passed, I remember thinking, oh, this is why we're here. This is why we were brought to Vancouver. This is why we're meant to be here, is to really, help Auntie through this and help her to rebuild on the other side. And so that's what my husband, David, and I really spent a lot of time doing was really helping her to have a little spark in life again, get out there, have a little adventure. Her and I went on a few different trips. One of them was Hawaii. And that was one of the last places my uncle and her had gone to. And it was close to, well, it was just before COVID. And it was about 2 years after my uncle's passing. I actually had a close friend of mine in the Cayman Islands that was diagnosed with cancer. And we lost her December 22nd, 2019. And it rocked me because it was the first time I had a close friend pass. And so it was changing and shifting everything inside of me in the way I viewed life, of watching people, pass at these really young ages and watching people pick up their lives and move on and trying to be a part of that experience in a positive way and trying to work through your own feelings along the route. And shortly after getting back from the celebration of life of my beautiful friend, Annabelle, who had passed, my auntie had cramps that just wouldn't go away. We went into hospital and she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And this is a woman that 20 years almost to the date had been diagnosed with breast cancer. And she had beat that 20 years ago. And our lives were just rocked in that moment. Just rocked. Like never in a million years did I think that was what was coming down the line, was her diagnosis. And that, this person had been through so much, and she was just ready to start life. And that was interrupted. But this is one of the strongest people I've ever met. And so she went at this with vengeance, took on the toughest chemo she possibly could and had the surgeries she needed. And we walked beside each other as best we could. You're never in that same boat as the person that's actually going through it, but I did my absolute best. And along the way, it just changes you. It's like these switchbacks we talked about. You go along life for so long and you're cruising along and you're dancing with the road. And then this tight turn comes up and you have to slow right down. And you have to take it so carefully. You don't know what's on the other side. You don't know what's speeding around the corner. And the fun kind of halts for a hot second. And we're just trying to figure out how to keep looking forward rather than be in this state of terror that we're going to lose her to. And about 8 months in, it looked like the chemo was working and the surgeries worked, and she got a break. And that felt really wonderful. And she was really optimistic. And now, about a month in, I can't say the person because they want to stay private, but an extremely, when I say extremely, about as close as you can get, family member was diagnosed with cancer. It was caught early, thank God. I took them in for surgery. And you're just in this deep state of fear of how can all these people just be left, right, and center? These healthy, able-bodied, beautiful people that you love so dearly. How can there be just that, like, one more switchback? And you fall to pieces, but you can't stay there. You have to get going again, because this is also life. This can't be the thing that all of a sudden steals the rest of the joys in your life. This can't be the thing that steals those relationships and the beautiful memories that were and are to come. And shortly after the surgery of this loved one, the surgery went really well, and that fear subsided. My auntie was re-diagnosed with cancer. And with about 3 days of that, my beautiful dog, Allie, became paralyzed. I remember thinking, this is too much. Where's that open road? When do you get to dance again with the road? When do these people that you love get to dance again? Little Allie girl did well for a year and passed. My father-in-law, this beautiful soul, contracted COVID, and we lost him as well. And my auntie's cancer continually progressed. And as of this past Saturday, September 24th, following her birthday. Her 64th birthday was on September 23rd. She passed. And I went from this life where you're just living and there's hard moments and there's sad moments, but nothing rocked us. Nothing shook the ground that you walked on. Nothing made it where you didn't know up from down, left from right. Your reality shifted in a way that you suddenly, everything you knew just wasn't anymore. But the point of this all is that you don't really have to make sense of it. And that took me a really long time because I was trying so hard to make sense of it all. And I kept asking like the whys. Why? Why these beautiful people that are getting sick? Why these beautiful souls that keep leaving us so soon? And you have that part of you that wants so badly to say, and why us? Can we have a break? Can I just breathe? Can I just have a straight road? Just give me a little bit of a straight road, even just for like 3 months. But then it changed. And suddenly I realized that you have to honor those moments that you want to rage. And you have to honor the moments that you feel pure bliss. Even if you feel guilt, because these people in front of you are staring at mortality and their worst fears. And you're out here feeling a moment of bliss. How dare you? But not how dare you. It's all part of it. It's all messy. It's all part of the journey. And I even sit here in my aunt's apartment at this very moment that I'm recording. And I can feel her and I can smell her. But even in this afternoon that I've spent here by myself, I've laughed, I've smiled, I've cried. And none of them mattered more than the other. And they were all just emotion. And I didn't know which one was coming next. And I didn't run from either or any of them. I just sat in them. And sometimes I cried on her bed. And I sat on her sofa and watched The Real Housewives, which is one of her and I's favorite shows. And that felt okay too. And so this episode, we're talking and tackling of like the messiness that is the human experience and the human emotions that come along with those moments in time that take your breath away. But it's also the things that reminds you that you had breath in your lungs to begin with. So here we are. And we're going to talk a little bit more. You were warned. I gave you due time to turn this off.
If you made it through that without a tear, I feel like you have no soul, but that's okay. What you're really speaking to are these stark contrasts in life that truthfully, we live so much in a state of being under this illusion that we're in control and that we know our destiny and what is going to happen and what is going to be. But then there's these massive contrasts that happen in life. And when I speak to contrast, I just mean exactly what Lori's saying here, where you're walking along, morning stroll on the seawall under the sunshine, and our heads sometimes are so filled with worry and anxiety over things that ultimately don't matter. A lot of times your worry and your anxiety are just fabrications of the mind and outcomes and possibilities that aren't necessarily into life and under fruition. But the real big switchbacks in life are truthfully, I love that speech from years ago. It was late 90s, I think 1999, wear sunscreen. And I highly encourage you to have a listen. And there's that one line that, the real things that are going to cause us genuine worry in life are the things that come out of nowhere on an idle Tuesday. And it does make you beg the question when you get hit with those, especially in a case like you're hearing where it's the idle Tuesday and then the fucked up Thursday and then the holy shit Saturday. When you start to question the why me, we're intrinsic human beings. We cannot help but ask that question. And the reality is, it is just is. And that's not something in our control. And as we navigate something so earth-shattering and earth-rocking that's come out of nowhere, I think it's one of those times in life that we cannot place an expectation on ourselves. Do we have the ability as humans to navigate each emotion as they come? Absolutely. But when you get swept up in that tsunami, and that's exactly what it feels like, you are disoriented, you are angry, you're literally having parts of you ripped off your body, the sock, the shirt, the shoe, proverbially. And it makes a lot of sense that as a human being, you stand going through this utterly confused and battling every single aftershock and afterwave of emotion. And when you move through a human experience like that, anyone that's ever suffered a great loss, whatever that looks like or means for you, it makes a lot of sense that the work on the other side of that, and even for you, Lori, as you navigate the rest of this switchback, your route back onto that open road is not going to be the same road you thought you were turning on before you hit the switchback. You end up a new evolved version of your human experience, and your perception of the world is going to be greatly changed on the other side of this. But the biggest gift with all that deep hurt that you are feeling, and anyone that's resonating this is feeling, it's all love. All of it.
Mm-hmm.
Every angry moment, every retching sob, those deep ones that come out of the very gut of your existence, that moment of peak joy, that moment where you just want to curse whatever God, universe, whatever that looks like to you, it is all love. And that's where, when you end up on this new road, this new part of your journey, this new part of your experience, you are changed, but you also come equipped with more than you came into the switchback to. And it's another lesson on the beautiful gift to love so selflessly. You've showed up for this person in such a huge capacity, an authentic, raw person in these raw moments with no instruction manual of how to push through it. We hear the term cancer over and over again. There's cancer walks, cancer this, cancer that, to the point that the word almost loses meaning. But really, anyone that's faced up against that word knows life is earth-shatteringly different moving through it. But you have loved a soul so deeply. And that love is going to mean down the line on this road, even as you navigate out of the switchback, you're going to hit some road curves that knock you into all those feelings that are very, very uncomfortable. Nobody likes to feel sad. No one likes to feel furiously angry at circumstance that you would not have chosen for yourself. And it may not always bring you comfort in that moment to know that it is love, but when you step back and you remove yourself from all of that, as ironic as the statement is, because it sounds so counterintuitive to what the experience feels like, you're like, holy fuck, how lucky am I to have known a love so pure and deep, and to have shared a bond with a human that, regardless of time, space, or eternity, no one can take away from you.
I can say without a doubt wow, like even just obviously now being, 6 days out of my aunt's passing and that experience, like we were in that hospital room holding her hand, telling her how much she was loved, right down to her last breath. And even the night before, I slept over at the hospital beside her bed, and and you just kind of know. But even in that moment, when you're like just pure fear, pure sadness, overwhelmed, that practice of not only gratitude, but because of all those experiences of loss prior. And as much as you don't want to be practiced at this, it's not, like I'd rather not be practiced at this, but because there has been now so much experience over the past 4 years that I was able to stay so present enough to like just be so aware of the feel of her hand in mine, and to be able to just tell her, so, like, I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful for what we've had. I'm so thankful for you. And then even afterwards, that when you want to puke, quite literally, you feel like you're going to puke with grief and all the other things are coming along. All the while, you just know you're going to come out on the other side of this and be better for it. If you allow yourself, I guess, to be. Because the one thing that has constantly carried through, and while first it had to be that kind of like a bit of like that awakening or that lens shift, was just how insanely lucky a person is to have breath in your lungs and an able body. Because when you're watching somebody that used to have that and would give anything for that, and then like that's what drove the suddenly like, I have got to start looking at life with so much more clarity than what I am now, because there's so much that's getting taken for granted. And it completely shifted everything in how I saw life and how I saw people and how I saw myself and what I did on a daily basis and the gratitude and that sort of thing. And so even when I was facing what has been one of this, that moment that you can't help but play in your head as, one of the most heartbreaking experiences of saying goodbye to somebody that you love, and you're watching it kind of come down the tracks. I was able to just still at least have the littlest crack of light that was like, this feeling won't last forever, but this feeling is supposed to be there. And this feeling is also going to deepen the feeling of gratitude and the feeling of aliveness and that part of yourself that suddenly notices, how green the leaves are, or notices how crisp the air is, or sits longer at a sunset or a sunrise than you did before, because you don't know what could happen. Not living in fear, but just living in this deep awareness of your mortality, therefore an appreciation for it as well. And I got a tattoo of a hummingbird, because when my uncle was in the hospital, he would talk about this hummingbird visiting his window. And weirdly enough, I had purchased a hummingbird, like a coin necklace, and he would talk about this hummingbird coming to the window. And we thought it was because of the drugs he was on for pain, because it was wintertime and snowing. And we were like, there's probably no hummingbird. And then it was the last day that he was in this specific hospital, and the hummingbird came to the window, and he was like, there's the hummingbird. And we were like, oh my gosh, the hummingbird exists. And after his passing, we, whether or not it was because of, how the brain works, or because it was actual signs, regardless, my auntie and I would see hummingbirds everywhere. They would show up everywhere. And then we'd also gift them to each other on mugs or on coffee things or whatever the case may be. And the tattoo that I just got a few months back is a hummingbird on my arm. And that hummingbird is so that I never forget what I learned over this chapter of my life, so that I'm constantly in an awareness as much as you possibly can, because it doesn't stay with you forever. That like rawness and pureness of that experience, you have to work almost to keep it alive. And it's not that you want to keep the mourning and the grieving necessarily alive, but you want to keep the meaning that you've learned from that alive. because that serves you in ways that you couldn't possibly just get from reading a book. You couldn't possibly just get from someone telling you a story. You can't possibly just get unless you actually have that full-blown experience. And so as much as I would never, ever want my growth and my learning as a human being be at the contrast of the suffering and the pain and the loss of life of my loved ones, but I sure as hell am not going to let it be for naught. And it has fundamentally, completely changed me as a person. Doesn't mean that, I don't have a fuck ton of shit still to work on, but it definitely means that I've never had more fire within me to take on this life in any way I possibly can because of it. And because of being a part of this experience. And so I changed that saying of this isn't happening to me. This is happening for me ultimately.
One of the greatest things that I hold on to that helps root me when inevitably you're not doing the work and things feel a bit off the rails is exactly not a statement out of fear, but out of gratitude of the knowing, is that there is a fragility to this lived experience and time spent on earth. And subsequently, one of the number one things I value is time and time spent. And when people say time flies, I'm always like, I'm okay with that, so long as it's invested in time well spent. And often the part of what I consider that to be is the engagement of connecting with other human beings. It is the engagement and connection to nature, where nature is all living things and we're all part of it. And you have this recognition of it, and you go slow and you take that breath and you're cognizant of the fact that you are alive and you have this ability to be present and consciously aware in that moment. And then there's also this beauty in knowing of the unknown. We are sharing this experience right now. We are hearing and listening to each other in this moment, but none of us really know the purpose of our time here. Quite truthfully, it's like that existential crisis question where it's, why are we here? And you can end up looking into the endless vast abyss of stars. But I never look at that as a crisis. I look at that with eyes of wonder. And I think the only way you inherit that viewpoint is through the contrast of the struggle, plain and simple. And exactly as you were saying, Lori, you don't wish for yourself or another individual to have to walk through that in this life. But that is the perspective that you leave those experiences with, hopefully, because that is the beauty of that element of that experience. And it's very easy to just get caught and knocked into the wave of emotion and always live there. It's important to feel all the emotions of the switchback and feel them as slowly and deeply as necessary. You might need even to continue forward and do a reverse hop back and then drive again. But eventually you do move through it. And as I say, the road is different on the other side, but it doesn't need to be an ugly different. It's just a new lens.
I'm going to speak for myself, but I think everyone that's listening can understand and relate. But it's like when you're feeling that horrible feeling or that lost feeling or the ground coming out from you, and not, again, this isn't just because of a loss of a person. I've witnessed this with, loved ones that lost jobs, that lost relationships, that lost, it's where that kind of ground that falls out from under you. And when you're feeling that emotion, whether that's rage, sometimes rage can be an easier emotion because then you want to go externally with it. right? You can blame that person or rage on this or this. And not that it's healthy when you do those things. I'm not suggesting, like have a good time. You got an excuse. I'm just
Poke my
saying
head out my
that-
window. Fuck you.
yeah. Okay. But sometimes that can be, almost embraced the same way as when you have an elated, excited, reminiscing, laughing moment about whatever, that's embraced. It's those moments of that deep pain, like the deep suffering or sorrow, and that deep grief and that nausea or where the physical pain. And there's everything inside of us that's just like, oh, make this stop. Please, God, make this stop. And we want to distract it away, or we want to do anything in our power to make that thing go away. And I just can't say it enough, from even just listening to things about grief, just, because I went down a rabbit hole when I was trying to figure out how to show up best for my aunt. So I would read books on how to, when you are one of this, fundamental caregivers or substantial people, how do I do this? Because you say there's no rule book. How the fuck do I do this? But it also led me down the thing of like, what to know about what's to come in the grief that you're going to experience. And so it helped me also know that when those darkest moments come, that is part of it. Just the same as when we talked about in past episodes, when you take that leap of faith and you hit the fucking fear button and panic goes, what did I do? What did I do? That's part of it. And that you cannot rush through that. And that it doesn't help. And that's where you're not going to that, like, this is happening for me, not to me. And I'm going to do the positive thing. And I'm going to that's not what we're suggesting. And that's important to know that that's not real. That's not authentic. And that's going to get you nowhere fast, because you have to feel those other feelings too and move through them. And you'll, like you just said, it might come back around. That switchback might be right around, but I promise you that it will pass. You might experience it to the end of your days about that specific thing, but it won't last forever, that moment. And it's really, really important that you allow yourself to feel all the messy feelings that you need to feel for as long as you feel. And then you kind of go, well, how long? How long do you stay into it before you're just wallowing and then it turns to depression and so forth and so forth? And the only thing, and this is only my opinion on it, and this is only my experience on it, is someone that's dealt with deep, deep depression and has done a lot of self-work and has done a lot of experimenting in regards to how to best foster my mental health. I've had the hardest 4 years of my entire life by a landslide, as you could hear. And I never once slipped into depression. And why I think that is because throughout all of this, I've allowed myself to feel all the plethora of emotions that possibly could have come on this, smorgasbord, is that I've constantly exposed myself to beautiful things and beautiful experiences, but allowed myself to feel whatever I needed to feel while in them. And so sometimes I'm watching a sunset and I'm bawling my eyes out. And sometimes I'm watching a sunset and I'm smiling, or I'm going for a walk and I'm bawling my eyes out, but I go for a walk or I'm smiling, or I'm rage walking, or whatever that looks like. But I get out of bed, even when I want to close the blinds. And I don't get me wrong, I had the first couple of days where I closed the blinds and that's all I did was cry. But I was like, you got to get out of bed and you just got to expose yourself to one beautiful thing, just one. And it has allowed me to remember at least what's on the other side of this. And then also when I'm in the deep grief, to have a deep appreciation when I'm literally in the fetal position, sobbing. Because that's beautiful as well. Because like you've said, all it is love. And so when I'm in deep, deep sorrow, I understand that is the contrast of how deeply I loved. Do the things that connect you to life, connect you to beauty, and connect you to the love, so that the contrast doesn't sway further one way than the other.
You just beautifully motivation maintenance us.
Did I?
You really did. I think that was a tremendous tool.
One thing, though, to leave everybody on just a beautiful note of humanity, because I know that right now we have so many reasons to lose faith in humanity, that this is one that I'll just never forget. And you probably won't either after hearing it. When my auntie had to go to the hospital last Tuesday, not this Tuesday, but the last, when the ambulance came, it was they knew it was a non-emergency. She was going because there was just issues that she couldn't be at home anymore. And there wasn't a bed in palliative care yet. So the ambulance needed to take her because we couldn't. And my mom was with her. As they were driving, one of the EMTs said to my auntie, "What's your favorite beach?" She said, "Jericho." He had seen obviously what cancer she had, and he had seen her, and he would have known that was her last trip. And he himself had lost his wife to cancer just this past April. And he said, "Well, you know what? Let's go there instead." So they drove past the hospital and they drove to Jericho Beach, and they took her out on the stretcher and they rolled her right up to the sand.
Oh.
And it was the most beautiful Vancouver day. And they just stood there and they let my auntie look at the ocean and feel the breeze on her face. And then they went to the front of the ambulance and said, "Let's give them some privacy so my mom and my auntie could have a little minute." And I got the pictures of it. And the next day when she was at the hospital, I said to her, "Oh, you got like a lot more color since yesterday." And she said, "Yeah, well, I got it when I was at the beach."
Ooh, that is your motivation.
Yeah, that's your motivation.
You've just listened to the Motovation Podcast with your host, Chrissy Van, and me, Lori Joy Kingwell.
Thanks for joining us along the ride. We've got new episodes dropping every Monday, and we're all about community. So follow us on Instagram at Motovation Podcast and visit our website at themotovation.com.
And in the meantime, tanks full and full throttle.